So when I first saw that the gospel reading was this a passage that if you're in church, you've heard it before, God is love, various versions of it, talking about how God is love, how Jesus in God's love, God's relationship with Jesus models for us, what Jesus models in his relationship with us, that God is love. And it may sound tired, it may sound overly familiar, but I think that God is calling us right now, particularly at MCC Boston, to embody love in a particular way. So I tried to pick readings and songs that reminded us that when Jesus spoke in words that are recorded in this book, they were not meant to be God's last will and testament. They're not meant to be confined to thinking about the past. These words breathe and speak to us. And right now, we need love as much as we need God in the world. In the United Church of Christ, where I'm ordained, as well as in MCC, we have a phrase that says, God is still speaking. And I believe that God is speaking to us right now about the need to love, not in some detached way, not in some metaphysical way only, though I believe in that, but in concrete, particular actions. And Jesus describes what that love looks like so that we can embody it today. So after church, we'll be watching this video about transgender history, and it's partly because of, not only because we tell our history at MCC when we can, but because in November, there will be a ballot referendum that will give voters the opportunity to revoke transgender civil rights. Now, this was signed into law in Massachusetts a year and a half ago by Governor Baker. New Hampshire, you might have seen this week, became the last New England state to pass a civil rights protection through its legislature for transgender people. So right now, all of New England has certain kinds of legal protections for transgender people that are not found in any other state or any other part of the country like this. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a step. But Massachusetts, who became the first state to model gay marriage, may end up being the first state to revoke civil rights for transgender people. That's what's going to be on the ballot in November, and I'm going to say this and ask you to say it with me. Vote yes to protect. Can you say that? Vote yes to protect. One more time. Vote yes to protect. That's because, like a lot of weird laws or ballot propositions, the way it's appearing on the ballot, it will be hard to figure out precisely how to vote, yes or no. Like, no, I'm in favor of transgender rights, or yes, I'm in favor of transgender rights. But I want us to remember, vote yes to protect. Vote yes to protect. And why I'm making this connection tonight with this gospel passage and why we're showing this movie is I've had the opportunity to see the films and the TV ads that the opposition is going to be using. They're ugly, ugly, ugly things that focus on bathrooms and little girls in bathrooms and men in suits looking at little girls in bathrooms, and they're going to try and persuade people that this is what this law is about. And even more alarming to me as a religious person is that the people funding this and a lot of the conversation that we'll be hearing over the months to come will be from religious people using this book in which Jesus embodies a God of love to preach hatred and to urge discrimination against transgender people. And I think it's important for us in church to be political on this issue of transgender rights as part of our faith, not just part of our politics. Though I'm happy with it being a political stance. The truth is, for me, it is a religious issue. When Jesus talks about God being love, and when we hear the words that Jesus offers about what it means to be friends in community, it's precisely for times like this when we have to step up and be in solidarity with each other and to challenge any notion that there are two perspectives on this question. A religious perspective that is anti-transgender, and a secular perspective that is affirming of human rights. For us as Christians and as followers of Jesus, while we may have this political conviction as well, we also have a faith conviction that the God of love loves everyone, and that we don't allow people who are not a majority to be picked off by powerful interests because no one will stand with them. As religious people, Jesus commands us. I don't like that word very much. I went to a seminary in Berkeley, California, where we would pride ourselves on saying we don't have requirements at this seminary, we just have expectations. And we used to joke that we would never teach the 10 commandments, we would teach the 10 expectations, because command sounds like such a difficult word. But I think in this case, it's helpful for us to hear that for Jesus, it rose to the level of command that we love each other. Of course, we're free to refuse that command or accept it. In a general way, the word commandments in Jesus' mouth in the other Gospels is not always positive. Jesus thinks there's 10 and it's too many, and also that all the expectations in the law are burdensome for people. They're too much. You can't live up to them. What does he say here? I tell you this so that your joy may be complete, not so that you'll feel inferior when you read about the expectations and can't live up to it. Jesus condenses or summarizes the commandments to love of God and love of neighbor. And in this passage, he speaks very clearly and very specifically about what that love looks like. He says to the people then, and I believe also to us, that no one has greater love than this, to lay down your life for your friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I command you to love. No greater love than to lay down our lives for our friends and for Jesus. We are all friends. Friends with expectations. Friends that we will be in solidarity with each other. That's what it means to lay down your life. It means not only what you're for, but what you'll do for another person. Not only who you're with, but what you'll do when you stand with another person. A friendship that Jesus models that is even stronger than death. For Jesus, friendship is stronger than death. And he goes on to even characterize what friendship looks like. I no longer call you servants, but friends. This is the highest word that Jesus uses to describe what it means to be in community with each other. Not a hierarchy where one has power over another. Not something where some people have information and others don't. Transparent community in solidarity is what Jesus talks about here. I no longer call you servants, but friends, because the servants do not know what the master is doing. But you know everything that I am asking of you. As God has revealed it to me, so I reveal it to you. This is the model of faith community. This is the model of community that Jesus compels us to consider. And it means something at various times in history. So this is my theory of MCC. You've heard me say it before, perhaps, if you've heard me before. But I believe that God gathers people into communities for particular times to do something great that might not otherwise have been done if people didn't step up and say yes. I believe that God gathered churches like Metropolitan Community Church in 1968 so that there would be religious people to speak up on behalf of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. It wasn't just to provide a safe space for us, it was also so that we would be a voice to counter a negative religious voice. And I believe that God gathered metropolitan community churches in 1968 so that there would be a safe place of advocacy and care and solidarity for people with HIV and AIDS in the 1980s. Maybe it's not within God's power to prevent disease or the ravages of prejudice, human prejudice, but God can, through us, make a difference. And AIDS was a disease that was uniquely religiously stigmatized. Never before in history, in modern history, have people said that you have this disease as a sign of God's judgment and you don't deserve care, protection, advocacy, any of those things. But the metropolitan churches and some others were gathered so that there would be a voice and a place to say, that's not who God is. As religious people, we reject that. And I also believe that God has gathered us at MCC Boston so that today we could be advocates, religious advocates, in solidarity, laying down our lives for each other on the issue of transgender civil rights and some others as well. We didn't come into being randomly. We're here for a purpose, to prove to people and to ourselves that God is love. And love means being willing to lay down your life or walk alongside in your life with other people to make a difference, to be together, to embody that. I had the occasion twice in the month of April to do memorial services for MCC ministers. One, Reverend Jim Burns in Washington, D.C., and the other a few weeks ago in San Francisco for Reverend Jack Hogan. Both of them were MCC ministers who were ministers for almost 40 years, and I knew them the whole time. We all got ordained together way back in 1983. I didn't know that we would be lifelong friends at that time. But I'm so glad that these celebrations at the end of their lives, which came a little too soon, and both of them, if I may say so, died of HIV-related concerns. So that is still happening even today. But what happened at these celebrations was that they were in fact celebrations. Sad for the loss, proud of the solidarity for these two different people in different parts of the world, different parts of the country, who had given their lives in service to LGBT liberation. It was a celebration. And that's the kind of friendship that I'm grateful to have had in my life, to have colleagues who have given themselves to this cause. And because of that, we're able to have places like this. Right now, Jesus, I believe as plainly as he spoke in the first century, is inviting us to lay down our lives, that is to live our lives in solidarity with people who are transgender, so that not only about this law, but there's a real change in consciousness around gender right now that's taking place. And it's an outpouring of the Holy Spirit. MCC has always keyed in to what's happening with gender. Somehow I think that's our kind of weird, unique, odd gift. We're attuned to it. So what is happening right now is what it means for us to lay down our lives for each other, not passively, actively, to do something. And not just for us. You know, I'm going to give two other examples of solidarity that we need to bring to mind, and I bet you have others as well, that as people of faith, we don't just hear about them, but we say we're going to do something about it, somehow in the way we live our daily lives. This past week, perhaps you saw this story, I'm quoting from the New York Times, about two Native American brothers who were teenagers, one 17, one 19. We're at Colorado State University for a school tour, a campus tour. They had gone there from their community in New Mexico. Their names are Thomas Gray and Lloyd Gray. And they drove 7 hours to get to Colorado State University. I used to live in Colorado, so maybe this is partly why it's in my mind. To join this campus tour because they really wanted to go to Colorado State University. And they got there a few minutes late, and while on the tour, one of the parents became suspicious of them because they were too quiet. They didn't speak clearly when asked questions. They looked out of place. Well, we know what that means, and they knew what it means. This parent called the police, the campus police. And because of that incident, they were not able to complete the tour. They were detained. You can watch the videotape of it from the police body cam. And it was because, in the words of the university president, two young men, through no fault of their own, wound up frightened and humiliated because another campus visitor was concerned about their clothes and overall demeanor, which appears to have simply been shyness. The very idea that anyone might look like they don't belong at Colorado State University is anathema. This is what the university president said afterwards, after he heard about it. But I'm bringing it up for this reason. We might find ourselves, any of us, in a situation where rather than calling the police, we could stand in solidarity with someone who looks suspicious. This happened not only because of poor training on the part of the university, and not only because there is rampant racism in our society, but also because a group of people who were with them stood by and watched it happen. This is not what it means for us to lay down our lives for our friends. It's about being in solidarity with each other. So I'm going to give one other example before I stop. And that is, this past weekend, our current presidential administration announced that it was terminating temporary protective status for people in our country who are here from Honduras. Now there's a government policy, you may be aware of it, that has allowed people to come to our country from various places when there has been a catastrophe, a weather catastrophe, perhaps like a hurricane or an earthquake, or where government persecution is so terrible that they are in danger of losing their lives if they are not granted asylum. So this has been in place since President Bush put it in place for many years. And now our current administration is entering what's called temporary protective status, TPS, for these groups of people. And who are they? They are 85,000 people from Honduras who live here. These people are here legally. They are 85% of them are employed. 20% of them have mortgages. And I just say this to say that they came here legally, have been here legally, and now because of a change in how we see those who are different, they're going to be deported in the next year and a half. So 85,000 Hondurans this weekend that was announced. Since in the last 6 weeks, 200,000 people from El Salvador who are here legally will be deported, and 9,000 people from Nepal, and 45,000 from Haiti, many of whom live here in the Boston area. So we cannot stand by and hear the words of Jesus saying, "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down your life, or to invest yourself, or to join yourself with the situations of others. I don't call you servants, I call you friends, so that you can defend and be there for each other." So that's my invitation to us tonight. As we think about MCC Boston, who we are now, who we want to be next, I invite us to listen carefully to these words of Jesus. Greater love hath no one than this, than to lay down your life for others, and to see how it is that we as a spiritual community can join ourselves in struggle with others who have occupied the same place of stigma that we have occupied at times in our life, or may even occupy at this time in our lives. Let them say about MCC Boston, small in numbers, but strong in solidarity. They're a church where God is love, and love means loving people. Amen.